Good evening, everyone. My name is Martina Chow. I am a senior analyst based in London, working with Economist Impact's Policy and Insights team, particularly in the Sustainability Policy team. So we know that in a historic decision that was taken at the Fifth United Nations Environment Assembly in March 2022, all 193 member states decided to end plastic pollution. Negotiations for a legally binding agreement are now underway. But amidst all of this, it's important to think about how businesses can start planning for this and take action to really eliminate plastic waste across areas of their operation. An astounding 91% of plastics are currently not recycled, and their production uses a similar quantity of fossil fuels to airlines. In fact, also recent studies have shown that microplastics have actually found their way into nearly every crevice of the Earth. So in this context, how can companies work together on creative industry-wide solutions to really reduce plastic waste? How is advanced recycling contributing to managing this plastic waste? And what more needs to be done to ensure that waste is actually designed out of product life cycles and new materials produced, you actually use innovative technologies to prevent future harm onto the environment? So to discuss a lot of these really interesting questions with me today are a bunch of fantastic speakers. So first off, we have Anne Tracy, Chief Sustainability Officer at Colgate-Palmolive. Tim Fitzgerald, Chief Sustainability Officer at American Seafoods. Albert Duer, Executive Chairman and Co-Chief Executive at UBQ Materials. And Marcus Ericsson, co-founder of Five Gyres Institute. Thank you all so much for being here today and taking the time. So maybe just to sort of kick off the discussion, I want to ask you, Marcus, why do you think it is important to actually consider how products are actually designed when you think about plastic waste?
When I think about design of products, I think about the full life cycle of those materials, from the manufacturer's materials and life until they either become captured and back into circularity, or what is that life cycle? So those are different pathways. If we're going to, really try to keep things in circularity, we have to design for it. So at the front end, thinking, how does this material, not just the materials, but the packaging and the ability to disassemble materials, also the X of that value chain. Is there every step of the way, is there an incentive to get it back into circularity? That's where I think the design of products matter. It's thinking through the entire circular economy, getting it back to where it started.
And Anne, if you could maybe build on that and speak to, from your experience, what does it actually mean to design products in a way that they can actually be easily recycled? What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, and I might take just a minute to set up kind of how we're thinking of sustainability. We have a 2025 strategy at Colgate-Palmolive called the Sustainability and Social Impact Strategy, and it's really driven on the foundation of our purpose to reimagine a healthier future for all people, their pets, and our planet. And you can only do that through addressing some of these huge issues, such as eliminating plastic waste. And our strategy has three ambition pillars: driving social impact, helping millions of homes, and preserving our environment. Under helping millions of homes, it is about the design of our products, how to design them to be more beneficial in a way that doesn't harm the environment, that doesn't hurt biodiversity, and certainly in a way to eliminate plastic waste or to become more circular. And then under preserving our environment, likewise, we have one of our 11 actions and we consider it actually to be one of our lead or most key actions, is called eliminating plastic waste. We consider it at Colgate, since we are a large consumer packaged goods company and we do use plastic in almost every part of our packaging of our products. We consider eliminating plastic waste to be an existential issue for us and one that we have to tackle. And we can talk more about it, but we're part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Global Commitment. So we have committed to becoming 100% recyclable by 2025. And we have a commitment to reduce the overall amount of virgin plastic that we use by a third. And that includes things like increasing recycled content. But I'm sure we'll get more into the conversation. But design and focus of resources, time, money, and our people are very much where we're leaning into to get this work done.
Great. And Tim, what are some of the sort of specific considerations or challenges that might be associated with thinking about this in the context of food grade products?
Yeah, thanks, Martina. So for those not familiar with American Seafoods, we are a fishing company based in the US. We operate 6 catcher processors in the Pacific Ocean, which are basically fishing boats combined with factories. So we do process all of our fish at sea. And specifically with respect to packaging, our packaging materials are designed first and foremost to keep our products safe and protect them not only after they're caught and processed, but also in their journey all the way to our end customers, which are all around the world. So, we've been catching and distributing fish in a similar way for close to 30 years. And I think now is a really opportune time for us to be thinking about not only how do we keep this product safe and healthy and in a state where our customers receive it in the condition that they want, but also with packaging in mind that it's not just something that gets stripped down and thrown away once they receive it. And that is a shared responsibility between us and our customers. And I think in the last few years, we've really started to come to realize that.
Well, that's great. I want to come back to a point that Marcus made a little earlier and sort of get your thoughts on this, Albert. Obviously, part of this whole equation is also thinking about how you might be able to create a market for more reusable products. So based on that, how might principles of reuse actually be integrated in the design phase when you're thinking about designing these products for recyclability?
Well, when we think of reuse and recyclability, it's very important that we look at the whole life cycle, as Marcus was saying. It's not enough to simply look at a snapshot of a product. It's very important, not only the packaging, but what goes inside. And one of the things that we have found is that even in durables and ceramic durables, it's important that the initial material that you start with is the correct material. Okay, otherwise, you will have other side effects just because of the material that you chose. My understanding from the MacArthur Foundation is that about 80% of the impact of a product is actually in the design phase, which includes the material. So if we want to do things in a better way, we have to start right at the beginning, which is the actual material that is being used. And then at the tail end of things, we need to find, like Anne was saying, and Tim, we need to find solutions to what is left over. And the leftover not only includes a lot of plastic, but it actually includes a lot of organics as well. And I've been in the recycling business for over 40 years. I was among the first people, or 20 years, sorry, among the first people that started taking bottles and turning them back into food packaging. And it was only at UBQ, now that I'm at UBQ, that we found a way of truly turning that circular economy into something that is viable. But it all starts, as Marcus was saying, it starts with your design, with the choice that you make. The only other point that I would like to make, I come from a country which is not rich, okay? I'm actually from Colombia originally. I'm not American or European. And one of the things that we have to be very careful about, though, is that when we choose these reusable or other options or move away from plastic, it's very important that we don't affect the poor sections of society. Because many of the solutions that are being provided today by some of the richer countries actually are very, very detrimental to the poorest people in places like where I come from. So that's something else that I think we need to keep in mind as we go forward.
No, those are all great points. And I'd love to come back to a few of those elements, thinking about incorporating waste into design, but also kind of these kind of more equitable frameworks of thinking about things. But maybe before we do that, if I could ask a follow-up question, and this is also open to all of you. You talk about these materials and thinking about these materials that are really critical to sort of ensuring that these principles are incorporated across the life cycle. What materials do we need to think about? What materials need to be used? Can we maybe set that scene quickly as well? don't know, maybe Albert, you can start, but I do welcome everyone to jump in.
Sure. Well, like I said, I've been in this materials area for a very long time. In UBQ, we actually found a solution to a lot of this. Okay, the biggest or most important thing is that we turn the circular economy into a reality. Okay, until now, circular economy has been extremely difficult. We are only able to resolve it a slice at a time, I like to say. If we resolve the bottle, we didn't resolve the cap. If we resolve the cap, we haven't resolved the label. Okay, and the big problem in general, and this applies even to electronics, is that whenever those items that you're trying to reuse are dirty, and by dirt I mean anything organic in it, you already have a huge problem. UBQ is an example of a material that took into account all of the problems that are involved in circularity. They didn't just try to fix one of the issues. We try to fix one of the core ones, which is the fact that no matter how much we take out of our garbage, how much we separate, we're always going to end up with what I call the garbage of the garbage, which is a lot of organics and then some additional unrecyclable plastics. And what we did was deal with all of that at one go and make a material that can replace either plastics or wood or even some minerals in many, many applications. And there's people working on many other solutions. Ours is not the only one, but I think that the big difference is that ours is here today and it's already a viable option for hundreds of products.
No, that's great. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add on that point. Otherwise, I can go ahead and sort of turn to the next point. Marcus, maybe?
I do. Just one question I had for Albert. Thinking, because you understand the full life cycle on the back end of materials and how to manage those, I'm wondering how often, do the folks with your expertise communicate with the folks on the design end, on the front end, to say how can you better design so on your end there's still materials. The materials aren't fouled by organics, aren't laminates of plastics and metals and paper that are so difficult to recycle. Is there a communication in both directions to make sure that the circularity, like you said, is real?
We do our best, and that's precisely why I'm here. I'm not a very public person, and I really don't like talking in public, but I'm here precisely because that's the kind of cooperation that we need across the board. And it's people like you and everyone who's listening to us that can make it happen. But there's no question, in our case in particular, for example, you mentioned those hard to recycle, those 17-layer films that no one knows what to do with it. But on the other hand, we need them so that Tim can ship his products safely, or whoever, food. Those are the types of products that UBQ can deal with. And we have no trouble with them so long as they're within the rest of the waste stream that we deal with. But it is that communication that is important, and it's very important that the thinking process around materials changes dramatically, and I'm sure that we're going to get into that further in the presentation.
Tim, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, and this is actually something that one of our board members said to me a few weeks ago, and she said that if we're calling it waste, it's already got a connotation that it should be thrown away. And so it's been really hard just personally to get out of the habit of calling these materials waste, and I don't know what the right term is for it. Maybe we'll come up with one on this panel, but especially in our case, a lot of it is really just once used raw material. And the issue is not so much in the technical challenges of recycling it. It is just getting out of the mentality of, hey, we've been throwing this away for X number of years just because that's what we've always done. And in a lot of cases, we're paying a lot of money to throw it away. And so if nothing else, it's more of a behavioral change issue for many, not all, but for many of the materials that we're dealing with, packaging and otherwise, to say, okay, well, let's not pay to throw these things away. And in a lot of cases, especially some of the films and the hard plastics and things like that, they have value. So it's really just a matter of saying, okay, we're going to reduce as much as possible everywhere we can, and what we can't reduce, let's figure out a way to monetize it or give it some other value that that we just haven't been doing up until now. So we're kind of in the throes of that right now with a lot of the materials that we use, packaging and otherwise. But I think just the nomenclature is really important to keep in mind.
Oh, that's great.
Can I build on that a little bit? So Tim hit on a lot of key points there, and I wanted to start by going back to the question around design and choosing the right material, which I think both Marcus and Albert touched on. Colgate-Palmolive, we have 30 brands globally, but the one you probably know us best for is Colgate toothpaste. It's our biggest brand. It's a big, oral health is the biggest part of our business. So we knew when we said we wanted to make all of our packaging recyclable, we had to tackle the tubes. We actually started that engineering of that tube back in 2015. And we, getting to the point around what material we started, one of the key criteria was to choose a material that was already in mainstream recycling, and we chose HDPE. As a quick tangent, the world isn't, US, I would blame us heavily here. We're not recycling nearly as much as Europe, and the rest of the world, the economics need to follow, as Tim suggested. It's still not where we need to be, and that's a whole nother discussion. But at least if we start to make our packaging recyclable, we're a step in the right direction. So we chose that rigid plastic, and we moved from an old tube which had multi-layers of different types of plastic with an aluminum layer in the middle, which was there for a purpose to protect the fluoride and the flavor, to a mono-material multi-layer HDPE tube. And it took quite a few years to get it right, because that's a rigid plastic and we had to make it feel like a tube, because to another one of Tim's points, people, especially when they're using our types of products, it's hard to get them to change their habits. We call that the intention action gap, and I'm sure that has a role to play in getting people to recycle the proper way. Anyway, we finally perfected the tube to the point where it also protected what was inside, which was equally important to us, and we've been rolling it out ever since. So choosing the headlines are that choosing the material is critical. Give yourself half a chance and choose one that is already, for the most part, being recycled. And then now we're working not only with the recycling infrastructure to make them aware that this is now recyclable. We shared the technology with over 70 different venues now, with some of our competitors, in fact, because we were encouraging them to move in the same direction. So now 3 out of the 4 tubes by 2025 will be HDPE tubes. So that was important to us, because it wouldn't make a difference if only Colgate was recyclable. So it would be interesting to probe a little more into both the economics and into what we call the intention action gap a little bit more.
No, absolutely. You kind of beat me to asking one of the questions around the sharing of technology. So that's great that you've mentioned that. Maybe we can circle back to the discussion we were having a little earlier on waste. We haven't quite found a new term for it just yet. But maybe, Albert, you can speak a little bit to what actually are some of the ways in which you can actually utilize what may be considered waste to actually feed into some of these new materials. And I wonder if you have any sort of practical examples that you might be able to share.
So we have a name for it already. It's called raw material. Okay. Literally what Tim said, we see it 100% as raw material. So our product actually has chicken bones in it. It has meat. It has the half-eaten hamburger you didn't finish last night, but it also has the packaging that it came in. And we don't care if it was paper, if it was carton, so that, pizza box with a lot of grease in it that no one wants to touch, we'll take it. And we don't care, again, whether it's a 17-layer plastic film or it's just anything, polystyrene foam that you threw away. Okay, that is what we call our raw material. Hopefully, you were really good at recycling. So everything that you could take out, you took out before we started. Okay, I want to make that point. We should definitely reuse products back into what they originally were, if that's economically and technically viable, we always want to do that. But what we end up with, like I told you before, is the garbage of the garbage. Now, where can we use it? Okay, depending on the app. And by the way, our product, on top of everything, this is another of the advantages. When you start getting into what I call a good circle, one of the things that happens is a lot of good things come from it. Our product, on top of it, is very climate positive, okay, because we avoid a lot of the methane emissions coming from landfills. So this product can be used today in a lot of semi-durable and durable goods. Okay, I'll start with the ones that give more wow to people, which is automotive. Okay, we're being used already by Mercedes. General Motors has already tried us out on a couple of things. So automotive has been one of the early adopters of UBQ, which has been surprising for us. Okay, because normally automotive is very slowly. What we have seen is that automotive has had a complete change of mind. And companies like Mercedes have really been incredible in the way that they have approached new materials. But to me, those are what I call the wow factor. But on the other hand, the ones that really excite me a lot have to do much more on some of the durable things that we consume every day, particularly construction materials. So today you can actually make flooring pretty much almost from a huge percentage of UBQ. You can make a furniture. Okay, so the table that you're probably all sitting on, we could probably make that 100%, chicken bones and fish on the inside and still have the beautiful laminate on the outside. In home and garden goods, the sheds that you use outside, it's already being used in pet houses, in pet goods. So a lot of different things can be made with UBQ. It's not a perfect product. It's a brand new material, okay, that didn't exist before, so it still requires work and adoption. But on the other hand, it is a lot easier to adopt than a lot of the other things and plastic materials and new materials that exist out there. So really, in many ways, I don't think I exaggerate when I say that we turn circularity. We have circularity on steroids with UBQ. And on top of that, like I say, sort of cream on it, is that we are also going to avoid huge amounts of emissions and help us on that end as well. So it is possible, by the way. And like I say, literally the garbage of the garbage is our raw material.
One man's trash is another man's treasure. I want to come back now to... Yes, I want to come to you actually, Marcus. So maybe if you want to build on that, and then I was going to ask you a separate question, but I'll let you kind of build on that first.
Sure. I think it's inspiring to hear what Albert is talking about, being able to use contaminated raw materials in a post-consumer application in whatever industry it's useful for. I know from my experience, talking with municipalities and states, if you compare now to 10 years ago, there's either not much or less recycling happening ever since China put the national sword in place in the post-pandemic. We're seeing less recycling. I know after the national sword was implemented, that we saw municipalities not being able to bear the cost of having to try to recycle some of the hard to recycle things. For example, in Cleveland, when I was there, maybe 5 years ago, they were now only accepting PET soda bottles. They were taking laundry detergent bottles and milk jugs, ease knives and pull off the conveyor belts. And the rest was going mostly to landfill. That may have changed since then. But it comes to the idea of, you can commit to things being recyclable, which is often a technical aspiration. But gold requires an economic reality. Now, on the back end, who's going to pay for the recovery and recycling of these materials? Is it the burden of the taxpayer in your municipality? Or is there enough raw material there to make it a self-sustaining, independent of subsidies, to use the raw material and make something that's profitable? That's where I see the biggest, recyclable versus recycled are very different realities. And it's the economics matter on the back end of how those materials get managed.
No, great. I was going to ask you exactly that, how you might be able to level the playing field between sort of products that are I guess, different products. But maybe I can turn to you, Anne, and maybe you can kind of build on what Marcus just said and speak to some of the challenges associated with actually recycling large volumes of plastic waste in your experience, and sort of, yeah, what you see the kind of environment to be like right now.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I said it already, but that's one reason we chose HDPE, which is a milk jug plastic, because that is one of the few that, on a larger scale does get recycled. But I agree with all of Marcus's points that, this is still a huge challenge in terms of, I would say, well, at the end of the day, it's the economics, right? But also the standard approaches across the infrastructure, and that's just the U.S. I do think that's why the UN plastics treaty is going to be really critical, and it is encouraging that all the member states did sign up to look at setting some overall guidance globally. But in the meantime, when we developed the tube, we said that the engineering was only half the job. The other half of the job, which we spend a lot of effort on globally, is meeting with NGOs and the infrastructure to try to educate and move forward the agenda of recycling the tubes. So we have resources that's all they do. They meet with APR, the Association for Plastic Recyclers in the US, and the PRI in Europe, and the equivalent all over the world. And we are participating in a number of the country plastic pacts. Those are all really important pathways, partnerships to help, push at the infrastructure level first. And then, we're going to be playing a huge role in communicating with consumers, or the people that buy our products. The reason we haven't done that yet is because until the infrastructure is ready, we face, frankly, a lot of criticism if we go directly to the consumer and say, recycle this. So it's tricky. The order of events across the recycling value chain, all the way to the end user, the consumer, it has to happen in kind of in a logical order. And the economics, what's frustrating is many companies like ours have stated that circularity is important for us to achieve our goals. We want to use quality recycled content. And if you add up all the companies, our peer set, that are making the same demand, there is going to be more supply. There's going to be more demand than supply right now. And it's also very expensive. So again, the economics is something we have to work on. There is value because we want to use it, but there seems to be a gap in how we make that happen.
Tim, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add 2 quick points building on what Anne was saying. First of all, Anne, I don't envy some of the challenges that you and big global CPG set of brands face when you're dealing with products that are making their way into the hands of hundreds of millions, if not billions, of individually behaving people. We are entirely a B2B company, so our customers look a lot different. We're selling large amounts of product to a smaller number of customers, and so in some ways we are in a position where we can actually develop partnerships and collaborations with our customers to work on co-designing new materials, but also just sharing the challenges of what to do when the fish is removed and the packaging is sitting in a pile in a factory somewhere in Europe or Asia or North America. But to your earlier point, I think that's also where we have to think about it less as a company and more as an industry, because American Seafood's doing it is one thing, but we're just one small part of the seafood industry, which is one small part of the food industry, which is one small, so you get the point. but I think that innovation sharing is really critical, and especially while we're waiting for infrastructure to build up, we really have to keep pushing that envelope, especially because in places where, like Europe, for example, we're soon going to be faced with extended producer responsibility. It's not just selling fish anymore. We have to budget in the fact that every material is going to be looked at and charged going into the EU, and that's something that no one has really given a lot of thought to before. So that sort of changes the economics of a lot of these models, and it's good that we're going to have to struggle through figuring it out, but it is also new for a lot of people in our industry.
No, and I want to come back to that point. Yes, Albert.
Yeah, if I could just add something, because I think there's a couple of important points here. One of them is the economics. Economics is key to everything. I agree with all of you. But also adoption of the material that is actually being recycled, or in the case of UBQ, the adoption of UBQ. It's a lot more difficult than you think sometimes, okay? So we find ourselves with certain barriers which to me are a little bit ridiculous, and it goes back to this intention action gap. I had never heard of that phrase, but it's a very good one, and I'm going to start using it. Okay, people tell you that they want to be sustainable, and then 2 seconds later, if they can't get exactly the same color that they were getting with another material, they're not willing to swap for the sustainable one. Or even worse, they'll offer 30-year warranties on a product that's probably not going to last for more than, or people are not going to use it for more than 4 or 5 before it ends up in the landfill. And they won't swap material because it needs to last 30 years when no one's ever going to use it for 30 years. And we see things like this both from the consumer, from the manufacturers, and in regulation. Okay, standards, construction standards. There are countries where you can actually not use recycle in construction materials. And many times you think Europe resolved it. Believe it, we're building our first large-scale plant in Europe right now, 80,000 tons. And the fact is that Europe has many of the deep problems that the US has. They're just reflected in different ways. So solving the recycling problem is going to take a lot more than what we're putting up right now. It actually requires, as you're saying, the full chain needs to be involved, and we need to have changes in mentality, both at the consumer, the manufacturer, and the government level.
Marcus, did you want to add anything to that? I see your hand.
Yes, very briefly. So, Martina, you mentioned, you said leveling the playing field, and that's kind of what the UN treaty aims to do for all countries that are participating. And one key thing that I see gets changed is the requirement to use post-consumer recycled content. One reason why 91% of plastics produced are often not recycled, at least that's a U.S. statistic, is because it's voluntary to use recycled content if you want. If it was required, like if CPG companies, you had to put 75% of your material had to come from recycled content, and it was across the playing field, so no one had a competitive advantage. You might see demand for that market, and it would make things, in Albert's case, there'd be greater markets for the materials that he's extracting from these mixed materials. So leveling playing field with really smart policy that creates these markets throughout the value chain, I think are a necessary part of this UN treaty we're debating.
No, I think that's a great segue. Maybe just a follow-up question on that I'd like to ask you, and Albert, I'd love for you to chime in here as well, because you mentioned it earlier in the discussion. How would you incorporate principles of equity in this context, right? Because leveling the playing field is one thing, but then what would it mean? I guess, how can you ensure that you level the playing field whilst not excluding players that perhaps right now can't afford to incorporate sort of recycled materials into their activities and processes? Maybe Marcus, I'll come to you first, and then Albert, you can kind of jump in.
My first thought, when you think of entrepreneurs that are coming to this space, they're thinking of novel business practices that reduce packaging. There's a whole reuse economy coming in that is recognizing that materials are expensive, and what are ways to use things in circularity. Companies like There's one that reuses mugs and cups, stainless steel materials through an entire city. Every restaurant and coffee shop participates. So I think there are these novel business materials from these young entrepreneurs that can overcome the hurdle of having to deal with expensive materials. So I guess I don't mind the idea that it's an expensive proposition to have to put the majority of new materials in your new product have to come from recycled raw materials.
I agree with what Marcus is saying. I think the technology, both in the materials sector, like in our case, where we're able to make a material that is actually competitive with petroleum-based plastics or other materials, is important. I think that's the key to it. In other words, we actually have to come up and invent new materials in order to solve some of this problem. There's no question that technology, in the sense of how we use things, will be very helpful. I also think, in the case, for example, of Colombia, people who recycle, we have actually benefited very much. Okay, I call the recyclers in Colombia, I call them it's the only entrepreneurship that requires zero anything in order to get into a business. Okay, and I know people that have literally started by collecting bottles, and today are college graduates, and their kids are college graduates thanks to the whole recycling system. So there are ways of doing this. The most important thing, though, that I always like to tell people is, let's not do stupid things. Okay, so there are times when we're willing to let a 1 pound piece of meat or chicken spoil because we don't want to use 300 grams of packaging. Okay, that doesn't make sense. So when you start doing things like that, that is when you really, really affect the people at the bottom of society. We have to make sure that if there's going to be subsidies, they have to come from the rich countries. They can't come from necessarily from the poor countries. And we have to make sure that what we are doing, a penny in countries like Colombia or in Africa or in many parts of Asia, a penny is the difference between eating or one of the kids eating tonight or not. And it's something that I always try to remind people. And at UBQ, I am very, very concerned always that when we come up with new applications, particularly in the developing world, that we come up with solutions that will not make things more expensive for anybody. But there are solutions, and we can find them. And like I always tell my kids, we're stupid enough to have made the problem, but we're also intelligent enough to solve it. So I hope that with all the work of all of us, that's exactly what's happening already.
Great. And I'm mindful of time, but I want to come back to one quick thing that you said, Tim, because I think it's really important. You mentioned earlier extended producer responsibility schemes. And so in the context of that, and I'd love for you to chime in as well, Anne, how can companies start to prepare for this? And what steps must be taken now, right, to make sure that you're well prepared and that you're actually kind of ahead of the curve almost?
Yeah, I think, and this is something that we're just starting to wrap our heads around as some of our customers in Europe are sort of letting us know that it's coming. But I think it's not something that we want to only be thinking about for Europe, for example. I mean, this is where it's starting, but I think we need to be thinking about it across the entire business and everything that we do. So I don't have a great answer for you yet, other than to say this is going to be a big focus of our work in the coming months and years. And the other thing I will just leave with, because I know we're short on time, is that I want to remind us and hopefully everyone watching that this issue is not solely about packaging. I think packaging gets a lot of the focus of these discussions, but there are lots of other operational materials, especially in our business, but in many others, that have nothing to do with packaging that we still need to think about re-engineering and sorting and collecting and recycling also. They just might not show up in your supermarket, or they might only show up in the back loading dock of the supermarket, but not make it out to the aisles. So, I just want to leave everyone with that reminder that those things are as important or more important as well.
And did you want to maybe add some final comments to that?
I think EPR plays a very important role. As Colgate-Palmolive, we're part of what's called the Consumer Goods Forum, which is a consortium of trade association, if you will, of over 400 manufacturers and retailers. And we actually, all of us, the member companies, a group of us developed a white paper called Optimal EPR. We support EPR. Its intention is to go toward developing infrastructure in municipalities where it doesn't exist. And it's, we have a large business in Europe, and we pay, frankly, millions of dollars in EPR fees, and it's expanding. As Tim said, it's expanding all over the world. The US now has 4 states with a number of others that are going to probably bring it on this year. So we recognize the importance, the role that EPR plays. And I think it also is designed to begin to try to level the playing field, begin to incentivize companies to reduce. And I think someone said, I don't know if it was Tim or someone, that the number one strategy is to reduce first and foremost. And then after we reduce, we have to make things recyclable and reusable. So that's the hierarchy, if you will, that we're all kind of trying to focus on.
Great. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you all so much for your time today, and thanks everyone for tuning in. I think this was a great reminder of how much we really need to think about the entire life cycle, and that when we think about recycling and solving the recycling problem, we really need to think about how a product is designed, what materials go into it, how we actually incentivize both design and recycling practices. So thank you everyone for tuning in. And yes, thank you all again for your time and insights. This was an incredibly interesting discussion.